there is a link between what someone thinks of themselves, what someone thinks of their people, and their history. Now, scholars talk about personal esteem, that means self-esteem, and then you have interpersonal or group esteem, which is what you think of your group or what you think of your race, racial esteem. Self-esteem and racial esteem are not the same thing. Someone can have very high self-esteem where they think highly of themselves and very low racial esteem where they think very badly of other black people. And in truth, most black people have very high self-esteem and very low racial esteem. And that's one of the reasons why black people are prone to fight each other, prone to disagree with each other, prone to conflict with each other, because someone thinks very highly of themselves and someone thinks very lowly of their group. And what
We didn't talked about this before.
Yeah.
We done talked about this before at length, whether on camera or off camera. We've talked about this before. Individual self-esteem versus group self-esteem. And you can look at most black environments, and not just the environments, but how black people behave among each other. And you can see that we have very, 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 very low collective self-esteem, and a good number of us have low individual self-esteem by the way we behave.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's the only thing I would push back on is I don't think black people individually have high self-esteem either.
Well, so one thing I thought about when I was, because I was, I've watched this a couple times and listened to it a couple times, and I'm thinking he may be talking about in London or in the UK, because he is a British historian. So he may be talking about the UK, but I don't want to put words in his mouth, but that's the thought that came in my mind, because I thought too that, well, in America, I don't think a lot of black people have high individual self-esteem. So it may be different in the UK. I don't know. I've never been, but I do know he's a London-based historian.
That's a fair point. If he's referencing the UK blacks, I don't know enough about blacks in the UK to comment.
Right.
But blacks here in America, I don't think we have.
Right.
I think we got an abundance of ego.
More ego than self-esteem. Not like, cause I do think there's a good number of us that have high individual self-esteem, but I don't think there's enough of us to have actual real high and a healthy level of self-esteem. I agree with you. I think it's more on the ego and the inflation thing of people out here faking, pump faking, but not necessarily real self-esteem, because if so, we would treat ourselves and each other better. And the proof is in the actions.
So that's exactly where I was going with
it. But I mean, bam, there it is. So let's keep it rolling.
And someone thinks very lowly of their group. And what happens is, if people can call each other the N and the B words, they're really saying, I don't give a monkeys about the black race. They've really just said that their racial esteem is very, very low. But every black person usually has very high personal esteem. So if someone thinks highly of themselves and very lowly of their group, that is a recipe for fighting. That is a recipe for conflict. And the way to raise people's racial esteem is to introduce them to their history. And if the history happens to be a great history, a history that people objectively can be proud of, they will see their people in a very different way to how they see their people at present. And that's...
So stop it right there, because I know we got a little bit, but kind of take this chunk so we don't forget what he's saying. So introducing people to their history, introducing people to a knowledge of self, specifically a group of people who've been stripped of their history and stripped of their knowledge of self. Now, as a historian, of course, I believe that we should be introduced to our history and introduced to our knowledge of self. But I think history is just a piece of it. Um, Neely Fuller Jr. talks about the 9 areas of human activity. I think we need to be reintroduced to who we are through the 9 areas of human activity. Yes, sex included, because I think we got a lot of deviant behaviors, and I really believe that knowledge of self can be looked at as an umbrella, but knowledge of self shouldn't be just one category, because it seems, from my purview, it seems that knowledge of self has meant, specifically only learning history. And I say learning history is a piece of it. You got to learn the psychology of it, you got to learn the economics of it, you got to go through all 9 areas of human activity and be reintroduced to how we interacted as a people before slavery. How did African people interact? How did African people exist in these 9 areas of human activity before white contact, before even any colonizers, any major colonizers that came and disturbed the way African people existed? Especially if we're going to say knowledge of self is what we need to be able to resurrect ourselves and change our situation. Knowledge of self is just an umbrella term. Break it down to 9 areas of human activity. What you think?
No, I agree with that. I think knowledge of self. I'm against all of the cliches that exist and pro black power, black nationalism, whatever label we want to put on it nowadays movement. Because people fall back on the cliches and they lose their meaning. There's no depth to the conversation no more. I was a couple years ago listening to 2 very intelligent black people um, have a conversation here in Charlotte, and they were only using cliches. And it was so amusing to me because neither one of them was saying anything, but they thought they were saying everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and these are very intelligent people. I know that they're smart. But
That was clichéing it up.
they was like they hadn't used their intelligence to really think about what those cliches meant. And that
Cliche and
doesn't mean that they're
buzzword.
stupid. Right. That just means they have been groomed and conditioned, indoctrinated to have these conversations these ways. And having those conversations those ways there's no substance to the conversation. There's no
Right.
meaning to it.
Right.
So
Right.
I agree with you. The human areas of activity are necessary. We need to define these terms. And to what he's saying, here in America, the reason I say we have, and I think it's critical that if we're going to say we disagree with something, we lay out the why we disagree. The reason I think that it is that black people in America have more ego and then self-esteem is because when you look at what self-esteem is having confidence in what you can do and knowing your limitations, not really needing to be validated, understanding I'm capable of this, I'm not capable of that. I know this information, but I don't know everything about that information. So I can receive new information. I can receive critiques. I can receive all these other things.
Right.
Self-esteem is also being aware of the existence of others and how they exist in relation to you. LeBron
Right.
James is better at basketball than me. Being able to understand that, not just LeBron James. Most of the
Everybody,
people on high school basketball teams are better
e-
at basketball.
everybody who own a team better than me. I know that.
Right, right. Being able to sit back and know your capabilities, right? Um, Ego is when everything becomes centered on self, when everything is about you, and when you become the greatest, or if you need to be recognized, you need to be the center of attention, you need to get your respect, everything becomes about you. And when I look at black people operate in America, I don't see a lot of self-esteem. I see a whole lot of ego. I don't see a lot of awareness about what's going on, our relationship to the world we live in, our relationship to each other, being able to take a back seat to somebody else. I don't see a lot of that. I see a whole lot of, well, what about me? Well, what about
Yeah.
us? Well, what about
Yeah.
this? Well, what about that? Well, I need mine. I'm gonna get this. I'm gonna get everything is
Everything is
I,
short
me,
term.
me. Right. So
Yeah.
that's why I say that.
Your picture went out.
Is my sound still there?
Yeah, your sound still here. So it's
I
all
don't know
good.
why my picture went out because I'm using my laptop cam.
I don't know. We just there you go. You're back. We're gonna keep rolling though. But yeah, so yeah, what you said.
Yeah,
Let's
yeah.
let him let's go ahead and let this go. It messed us up. Technology.
To how they see their people at present. And that's the difference between high self esteem, low racial esteem, to having a balance where you have high self esteem and high racial or ethnic esteem. The purpose of my work generally is to build that psychological balance between high personal esteem and high self esteem.
Yeah, that a balance does need to exist, but I think we got to work on one at a time though right now. And to be honest, I'm gonna be real. I think I do because I believe once individual self-esteem is raised in the proper manner, in the proper context, in the proper cultural context, to a desired goal that we've laid out for ourselves, because we can't just be raising individual self-esteem on just any whim that could even further divide us, because there's no point in raising a person's self-esteem if that self-esteem isn't going to lead to helping to raise the group esteem. So it has to be a directed end goal for this person's self-esteem to be raised, and the specific tools that are used are tools that are going to help push this person toward this goal, because the key word in self-esteem is self. So this is something that's going to help somebody help themselves. And so, since the key word in self-esteem is self, that's for the group as well, which means that nobody else is going to help raise our self-esteem. Nobody's going to raise our self-esteem for us, but us. But we got to make sure we have the proper tools. But one thing, going back to what you said, ego has to be removed. Everybody can't be the smartest person in the room. Everybody can't be the chief. We're going to have some followers. Everybody can't be a leader. And
Everybody
until we
can't
get
be
to that point,
our queen. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
right? Um, um, until we get to that point, we're going to continue to be at this space of domination, at the space of having an inferiority complex as individuals and as a group, and our conditions are going to keep getting worse.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's important to connect people to their roots, to their history as best we can. We know a lot of us, slavery did happen. We don't know where we came from, so it's hard to pinpoint exactly. But so that's another reason why I go back to the fungi analogy, the fungi analogy. When it's hard for you to pinpoint where you came from, it
You got to
gets
start where
really
you at.
right. So we know what we've done here in America. We could trace our lineage back. We know where about general vicinity we came from in Africa, and all that stuff is important. And I think we still need historians and scholars to continue to dig
Yeah,
into that.
everybody has a place.
Right. But when we start talking about this component of raising collective esteem and self-esteem, I agree with you. I think we're gonna have to seesaw it. You know what I'm saying? you raise self-esteem a little bit, then you raise group esteem a little bit. Then I think that's the way we're gonna have to do it, because the way we've seen it work out, when people put a lot of emphasis on past, they start to disconnect from present.
Right. It
Um,
has to be relevant. The past, Dr. Rashidi always talked about this, and I said this before. The history that we teach has to be relevant to today.
right,
And a lot of
right,
one of the reasons a lot of people are not interested in it is because it's not relevant. The average
right,
black person don't feel welcome into a lot of these black circles.
right. And I don't blame them, because I don't feel welcome either in some of them. And I know I've read a whole lot of books and listened to a lot of lectures and met a lot of people. But I think, yeah, I mean, absolutely. That's why I'm a fan of teaching history from the present backwards instead of from the back forwards. Um, because it's easier to make those connections. But to go, I just feel like you gotta. I don't feel like I think, because I've seen it in action. when you focus on the past, people feel disconnected from the present, and they lose visual of their current environment. That's the space we in right now. Everybody's so focused on the past that they're not paying attention to what's happening right now. And when you focus on the present, you lose sight of the things that have happened in the past that you dealt with and had to overcome, that you could learn from.
You got to find a balance. Like you said, you got to find a balance.
So I agree with you. I think, you know, we gotta pick one and work on that for a little bit. And then once we hit the milestones in that one, we got to come back over here to this one. I don't know that it's possible to do them both at the same time, because I don't think we're not at that space.
And I'm not going to say that he meant to say that both need to be done at the same time, but you know, that's just the first thought that came to my head is, all right, well, just thinking about the conditions, our actual conditions that we're in now, we're going to have to do one at a time, being realistic.
Right.
I get that. Because we can't